All right, welcome back, beautiful people. In this video, we're going to continue reading from the book that Mauro Biglino wrote, the ex-translator from the Vatican, the book that will forever change our ideas about the Bible. You know, they striked me on this channel again. That's why I wasn't uploading for a while. This channel has been so censored and shadow banned. I've had so many videos removed, so many strikes. You know, ever since 2017 when I uploaded that video about how the shootings were psychological psyops, basically, to push gun control agendas and MK Ultra and all that. Okay, so also too, because I'm so heavily shadow banned, you know, some of the other YouTubers I follow said that they're doing something to trick the algorithm so that they can actually get more visibility. So if everyone could subscribe, unsubscribe, and then subscribe again. I've heard that this is actually tricking the censorship algorithms and getting people more visibility again. So last time we left off, we were on this page right here. I'll go ahead and just read the last little part that I read in the last video. It says, the next part we're going to read is Hebrew is about the Bible, the Hebrew translations word by word, graphically representing the correspondence between terms. We will thus find out what they don't or what they do not want to tell us. And the next page here, it's got a reproduction of a detail of the Akkadian seal kept at the State Museum of Berlin, representing the sun with 11 celestial bodies, the 9 planets, plus the moon, and then it says Nibiru with a question mark, the 12th planet. The text of Sumerian, or Sumerianist Zechariah Sitchin, born in Baku, Azerbaijan in 1922, and later moved to Palestine, where he learned modern and ancient Hebrew and other Semitic and European languages, including in the bibliography, which constitute the primary source for what is following about Sumerians and their stories, a number of books, part of a publishing project started in 1976 called the Earth Chronicles. In chapter 2, we will see how this event is also extraordinarily reported in the story of creation and in the book of Genesis. This text is the source of all information we have gathered because it is particularly useful to go deeper into the understanding of the Sumerian tale. Genesis, in the beginning. Throughout the centuries, various Christian, Catholic, and Protestant churches have created a manipulation of text aimed at spreading beliefs which find no correspondence in the books they are spuriously based on. If the Bible is read in its literal meaning, it cannot be used as a foundation to build a religion. In the first chapter, we have assumed the creation of one or more atoms, and this information emerges from Sumerians' stories, at least in those interpretations which have been spreading throughout the world for the last decades. This was an operation of genetic engineering conducted by the Anunnaki to improve a species of primates existing on Earth and turn it into a race of workers to be employed in the most demanding tasks. That's still going on today. That's why everyone is employed at these dead-end 9-to-5 jobs where they never get ahead in life. That's where it all comes from. It's just grown more sophisticated over the years. They've instead of having everyone do physical, backbreaking labor, they just trick people into thinking they're free, and they get stuck in this 9-to-5 job slave matrix. Now we look in detail at the Sumerian story of man's creation. The writing of the generally accepted academic scholars often coincide with the theories of the so-called alternative authors. Here we will paraphrase Giovanni Pettinato, professor of Sumerology at the University of La Sapienza in Rome. The writings of the generally accepted academic scholars often coincide with the theories of the so-called alternative authors. We are at a banquet of Anunnaki and Ninmah, in parentheses, this is the previously mentioned mother goddess, which prompts Enki to create substitutes for gods so that they can free themselves from the burden of hard work, and tells him that the conformation of humankind is in his hands. The Sumerian myths tells that gods forced to dig a pile up, forced to dig and pile up earth, complained of their quality of life and blamed Enki for their troubled situation. Enki's mother then urges her son to intervene and help the Anunnaki, who are working extremely hard. She clearly invites him to create a god's substitute, a double, so they can break free from the burden of work. She suggests that he molds some servants. That's why when you read the New King James Bible, in the book of Genesis, it says how God created man, and on the seventh day God rested. Well, why would God rest? Because he just created a slave species to do all the work for him. That's us. Her son replies that the creature she talks about already exists, and asks her to fix on it the image of gods. God, man was created in God's image. That's also from the book of Genesis. All references to genetic modification and using the DNA of the gods to splice it with the hominids or whatever species was running around up on this planet, which created us. It all makes sense when you look at it in this context from an advanced understanding of biotech and genetic engineering. So they start the experiment, and we must recognize that Sumerians were wise and did not empower their creatures with omniscience and omnipotence. They dumbed us down. They were quite correct by documenting their failed experiments. Also, the early man had in fact some problematic errors. One could not close his hands, which were always outstretched. One's eyes were always open and reflected light. Another's feet were swollen and paralyzed. Then came a man with extremely low intelligence called an idiot. Another man could not hold back urine. A woman was incapable of bearing offspring. Finally, Ninmah produced an individual without genitals. So they were screwing up all kinds of genetic experiments at first when they were trying to create us. It is also said a premature birth occurred with Enki's seed. A hairy man was born with a closed throat, imperfect eyes, twisted ribs, paralyzed spine, suffering heart, head, and intestines, with hands unable to raise and hold anything. In short, before succeeding to produce a perfect being, the quote-unquote gods, again, gods with lowercase g's, even Mauro Biglino, talks about it the same way I've been for years. Sorry, let me read that again. In short, before succeeding to produce a perfect being, the gods had to make quite a few attempts, and they made many mistakes. Ninmah was afraid of being expelled because of her apparent inability, while Enki comforts and reassures her. Finally, the work pays off, and the goddess introduces the new being, Adama, the biblical Adam, the Lulu, the mingled, in parentheses it says. According to Sitchin's interpretation, the operation was meant to purify the male Anunnaki's blood in order to obtain the element that contains the essence of the individual, DNA, and implant it into the hominid that had been identified. Genesis tells us the event of man's creation, saying that after producing water and dividing it from the earth, thus letting the land dry out, and placing plants and animals. It goes and shows us all the Hebrew translation, Elohim, Adam, our liking, etc. And the Elohim said, "Let us make man with image of us in our liking." But the editors of the story seem to feel the need to emphasize something that the reader must absolutely understand. There must be no doubt whatsoever, because certainly this is an extraordinary event, and soon you'll understand why. In the next verse, 127, indeed, it seems he wants to make it clear. In short, and the Elohim made man with his image. the image of Elohim's or Elohim he made the male and female. In short, the author wants to tell us that the Elohim, in parentheses, Semitic plural term for lords from above, made man by using their Tselem, Tselem in Hebrew. But what is Tselem? And was this particular so important to point it out twice? Before seeing the deeper meaning of the Semitic root, we note that the Bible tells us how the Elohim took his decisions and said, let's do, using a Hebrew verbal form that is called cohortative mood, a form that contains the value of an exhortation, an invitation to do, a solicitation. In this cohortative mood, we can see a kind of summary of several discussions, hypotheses, and suggestions that Enki must have given to his team in order to find a solution to the problem we have listed in the previous chapter. Thus, using the cohortative mood, Genesis says, come on, let's work, let's proceed. Moreover, the issue of the term Elohim plural cannot be dismissed too early. We must try to practice freedom of thought and do not have any monotheistic dogma to defend, can proceed with confidence to consider the Elohim as a real plurality of persons. Ancient exegetes believed that the matter cannot be underestimated, and they tried to provide an explanation. The Syriacs assumed he was talking to the lofty assemblies. He talked with the angels. Others argued. Basil of Caesarea said, how can he talk like that if no one is working with him? Certainly the Sumerians allow us a better understanding of this when, quite simply, they account of the dialogue between Enki and those who were supposed to collaborate with him on this experiment. According to Sitchin, Sumerians said that man had been produced by purifying the blood of a young male Anunnaki and implanting an extract in the chosen hominid. Greek translators of this passage of Genesis, in parentheses it says the Septuagint version, certainly did not know about the Sumerian stories and in any case could not have any knowledge of genetic engineering, and thus have translated as follows. And it's got the Hebrew translations down here. Man, make us, let God the said and God said, let us make man in our image and like our resemblance. There are some elements to note. First of all, Greek translators have used two terms whose meaning are twofold. Omyosin has an abstract value and clearly represents the concept of similarity. Iacona, instead, has a more concrete value and represents any object showing the image of someone or something, for instance, a painting, a sculpture, a bas relief, an inlay, or embroidery work. We must here recognize that the translation Selem with the word Iacona, Greeks have come close to the very deepest meaning of this Semitic consonantal root. Indeed, Selem does not indicate the abstract concept of image as it is variously interpreted by religious literature and traditional theology, which try to provide different explanations. In fact, it denotes specifically a quid of matter that contains an image. Greek translators have maintained the same value for both prefixes that have in Hebrew quite dissimilar meanings. In the biblical text, the two words indicating the image and the resemblance are in fact preceded by two different prefixes, the Hebrew word for be and kai, which have different meanings. Such differences are no small matter. Be actually means with or by. Kai instead means as, according to. Therefore, it is correct to translate kai dumuti nu with the phase kata omioisan, which means as resemblance. Indeed, it is less correct to translate be sal. Sorry, this is kind of difficult. Be sal me nu with kata iakona, because the Hebrew code does not have the meaning of as resemblance, but the precise meaning of with the image, or better, with through that material which contains the image. Accordingly, we would have not been created in the image of Elohim, but with that material, something that contains the image of Elohim. Quite a key difference. Here is the concrete and new evidence, always left out by traditional religious interpretations because it is non-compatible with the doctrine they want to spread and support. Note also that Genesis says all creatures were made according to their species, but this is not said referring to man. After the divine intervention, his species is different from his original one. But there's more. As we continue, let's always keep in mind the Sumerian stories, which asserts that the material implanted into men was removed from Anunnaki purified blood. Actually, the term Selam denotes not only a concrete and material quid, but also it contains the original meaning of the Semitic root, the concept of cut off from. Under the term Selam, the Dictionary of Biblical Hebrew and Aramaic Brown Driver, Briggs, Hebrew, and English lexicon contains the following definitions, some cut off. In fact, the verbal root RWB is translated as cut off. And what is it which contains the image of someone who can be, quote unquote, cut off, cut out, or extracted? There is only one possible answer: DNA. If this is so, then it is easy to understand why the writer of Genesis, which is the genetics of Isis, genetics DNA, has felt the need to repeat twice that we have been made with his Selam, the Elohim's Selam, or Selam. He wanted to be sure the reader understood the correctness, or the concreteness of the event. This was the extraordinary nature of the act carried out by the Elohim, the lords who came from above, to introduce something, in parentheses, really theirs, into this creature, which has thus received its life, the new life breath, directly from God's. Early Jewish commentators claimed the reading and explanation of man's creation had to be a prerogative to the few who had the ability to understand. To understand, is this why? And after Adam, Kawa, in parentheses, Eve, we already learned about one Anunnaki's mistake, the formation of a female who could not breed. Genesis tells us that the formation of the female, and chapter 2 tells us that the Elohim felt the need to help Adam and so perform a strange operation. It is especially strange if we consider the traditional creative omnipotence of God. Verse 21 recites, there's a bunch of more Hebrew translations, Elohim, Yahweh, fall, made, and, slept, and, Adam, the, on, deep sleep, his ribs from, one, took, and. Yeah, in the book of Genesis, it talks about like God taking the rib from Adam and giving it to Eve. Again, those are just more references to, that translates to me as taking genetic material from one specimen and splicing it with another. And then more Hebrew translations, it under flesh, closed, and. And the Elohim called Yahweh made fall a deep sleep on Adam, and he slept and took one of his ribs and then closed his flesh. So this Elohim, who was known as Yahweh, needs Adam to be sleeping in order to operate, perform a surgery on him from some form of manipulation that must have been so painful as to require the subject to sleep a deep sleep. All this seems to be describing an ordinary anesthetic or anesthetic that allows cells collection from what is usually translated as ribs, but that might be have been something different. The term sila in Hebrew also means side, and with the precise meaning of its used in various passages of Old Testament, there are sides of temples, sides of closets, sides of altars, etc. Today, hematopoietic stem cells collection is done in modern laboratories from the side of the iliac bones, a surgery performed under anesthesia because it is very painful. The cells are then used for translations in the treatment of particular diseases. Stem cells can also be appropriately addressed to various scales of development. So the Elohim could have taken some cells from the side of a male Adam's body in order to clone or mold a female Adam. Recall that the word Adam is often written with the article ha-Adam, the Adam, indicating that this is not a proper name, but a generic one. It indicates a type of living creature, those on Adama, the earth, therefore the earthly ones. The early one was also identified with an evident somatic aspect. Indeed, these creatures were defined as having black heads, a characteristic that clearly distinguished them from their creators. It would have made no sense to emphasize this feature if it had not been a clear distinctive sign from the individuals who did not have black heads. And the term given to the new creature, Kawa, the living one, the mother of the living ones, just like the Anunnaki goddess who produced the new species, Homo sapiens, in Genesis 3:20 we read. We go into more of the Hebrew translations. His woman of name Adam the called and been has was it because Eve one living alive every of mother. And Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. Indeed, according to official science, it is obvious there must have been a mother of all men because the mitochondria, a key component of our cells, can only be transmitted by the female egg since they are too large to be contained in the male spermatozoa. So inevitably, the first female ancestor who gave the start to the development of the human species is not surprisingly called by many geneticists mitochondrial Eve. According to their researchers, the appearance of this first mother of mankind dates back to 300 to 250,000 BCE, a date that coincides with Sitchin's reconstruction. On their side, paleanthropologists tell us that Homo erectus, with an evolutionary inexplicable rapidity, developed into Homo sapiens. All other members of our closest relatives have been much longer a much longer evolutionary timing. Chimpanzees were almost the same for about 5 million years. Homo erectus scarcely changed in about 1.3 million years, and then disappeared and became Homo sapiens, whose cranial capacity rapidly increased by 50%. A brief criticism. All these events find an explanation in this particular interpretation of the Sumerian myth and biblical Genesis. Like it or not, convenient or inconvenient as it may be, the Sumerians and the Old Testament seem to be closely aligned. The Bible tells us the same story, recast in the light of a familiar monotheistic vision that would have developed only in later centuries. Of the original story, they maintained the plurality of the Elohim and the concrete matter used by the gods to create man with their image and resemblance. The spiritual God, transcendental and unique, then did not belong to the experience of the biblical authors who have told us a very concrete story using the cultural means they had at the time. And no church has the right to distort the history in order to build a consciousness controlling system based on perspectives that are distant from those texts defined as sacred, that instead have been purposely reinterpreted by the ruling power. Not surprisingly, a personal reading of such text has been discouraged for centuries when not explicitly forbidden. And over to the right, we got a picture. It says, representation of the seal of with a male deity, a female one, the tree, or a tree, with 7 branches, the snake behind the goddess, the biblical Eden. Okay, we're gonna take a break here. This next one is called the Giants. I'm just gonna talk about the Nephilim. So this is kind of I think this is like the next chapter. So what do you think? Do you think this is interesting stuff? Let me know in the comments. All right, I'm gonna upload this next part in a separate video file.